Hello, good morning. Still in the morning here in Brazil. And it's an honor to be this morning with you. I'm sorry for the delay. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation by FIS initiative to participate in this Colmeia Innova Summit, KISS 21, such a relevant, maybe the most relevant seminar in health-related topics in a moment in which our society looks at health from a different standpoint than was the case in the past. We used to think about health in an individual perspective, something that happens when you're sick, but today we realize that health is a global, planetary situation that has an impact on each and every one of us in a collective way, as never before in this generation. The pandemic has made all of us change our idea of what disease is, changing this new global situation with the pandemic. The topic of our panel is scarcity and innovation in the environment and its impact on health. We have the participation of our guest speakers, 3 guest speakers that are here with us this morning, and high-profile speakers, as all speakers have been in this summit. And I will start with alphabetical order. Mr. Andrea Bassi, founder and CEO. I'll just summarize the resumes quickly of our speakers. So Andrea Bassi is founder and CEO at Knowledge SRL. He has a long track record working with international organizations and governments, focusing on issues that are focused on green economy strategies, and summarizing he has a system dynamics PhD and a lot of experience in issues related to economic sustainability. And with Andrea Bassi, we have Dr. Maria Neira. She is a Spanish medical doctor. She is an international public official since 2005. She is the Public Health and Environment Director and Social and Health Determinants at the World Health Organization. She has a lot of experience, a fantastic track record with very well known internationally, and she will give us a very interesting approach to this topic. And last but not least, of course, we have Sérgio Besserman, a very well-known personality, not only in Brazil, but elsewhere. But here in Brazil, when we talk about environment and economics, the name Sérgio Besserman always comes up as one of the first names in the list. He is the strategic coordinator of Climate Reality Project Brazil. Mr. Besserman is an economist, a faculty. He used to work at the National Development Bank. He was the president of the demographic organization. And when environment was not such a hot topic, he was a specialist in the topic, and he's a very dear friend too. So the topic today, this morning, is the fact that if we were not in a pandemic as we are right now, we would have a totally different approach, maybe more technical, more conceptual on progress, development, and issues related to the concept of innovation, because the pandemic, and I'm talking about this because I published a chapter in a book that was published recently called Post-Pandemic. The pandemic actually did not create the quantum leap in changes, rather accelerated the process that was underway already. And this meeting itself is an innovation. And if it were not the pandemic, we would be face-to-face meeting somewhere. But much more than that, all the processes that started as far as technology, innovation, and technology underwent large transformations that were triggered in a more quicker manner with the pandemic. So, of course, environmental issues and its relationship with health, of course, exploded as a topic. And now remotely working in home office, everybody, inevitably, everywhere, globally in the planet, in any region of the world, regardless of social class, gender, race, the common thing now is that there is a democratic tragedy going on, a global catastrophe that we're living. And there is a consensus, a general consensus in the fact that much of what happened here is closely related or is a consequence or was an impact of environmental issues. So before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to talk about one topic, these new paradigms. And when I talked about the acceleration in innovation, how do these innovations actually make us rethink in terms of what we can call, quote unquote, fix and prevent, especially in issues related to how do we deal with our situation with the environment and health impacts related to the topic so-called 3D that had already begun but became accelerated with the decarbonization of economies, with the decentralization, and especially in the case of health innovations, digitalization. So with vaccines, this is an unprecedented connection between research groups, exchange of information, and technological development associated to this very strong connection, which is the possibility digitalization gave us. And this is the impact and the beginning of everything. And to conclude, a question that inevitably will be mentioned has to do with the silent pandemic and its impact in health. We're talking about environmental issues, which is a pandemic with global warming. There is no vaccine. There is no shot that you can take in the arm to eliminate or decrease the consequences. Which is the vaccine that we can take to make, especially as far as global warming is concerned? And talking about COVID-19's pandemic, in my opinion, and I guess in the opinion and the consensus, is that the silent and relentless slow pandemic. Well, thank you very much, our speakers. And due to a simple organization and alphabetical order issue, I will give the floor to Dr. Andrea Bassi, who will talk for 10 minutes. Mr. Bassi, please. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you also for the very nice introduction. I think you struck the right chords in a way in this case. I mean, we have realized now more than ever that health is at the center of development, at the center of the planning we have to do for supporting socio-economic and environmental progress, meaning that the health sector is clearly being impacted by what has happened outside of its domain concerning the environment, concerning economic growth and the consequences of economic growth. At the same time, the health sector is affecting development. It does affect economic activity via labor productivity, for instance, and a variety of other dynamics. So I think we have realized more and more so now that health is really at the center of the system. And by system, I mean the more integrated social, economic, and environmental dynamics that we are dealing with on a daily basis. So I think this is a first point to discuss. The main innovation we are dealing with is first the realization that health is really at the center of the systems we are dealing with. Now, at the same time, I believe what technologies has brought about and the innovation that, for instance, the COVID pandemic has brought about is the need to combine, and this is a second point I want to mention that I think is very important, top-down planning with bottom-up planning, meaning that top-down planning requires that we look at the co-benefits of health, meaning that planning for addressing the pandemic has been based on the amount of people that are impacted, the type of economic activities that have to be shut down, which ones are the essential activities that have to be maintained, and which ones are the ones instead that can be stopped for a certain period of time. That is more related to top-down planning. But at the same time, the development of the vaccine, understanding the causes, understanding the effects is pretty much a bottom-up activity. Also, the rollout of the vaccines, dealing with what facilities to use. Are they permanent facilities, temporary facilities? This is all bottom-up. And so the second point here is that within this system, we have to learn more and more going into the future to link the top-down policy approach with the bottom-up planning approach. And this is even more important when we look at climate change, when we look at climate resilience of facilities to provide health services. And so it's something that we have to do more and more. Now, as a third point connected to this, the solution that has emerged, as far as I can see in my research and my work at the policy level, is nature-based infrastructure. And that is because it offers a dual service. It supports both improving the climate resilience of health facilities. It supports reducing the burden of disease, for instance, by avoiding the spread and the emergence of the pandemic or COVID-related viruses. But at the same time, it makes so that we, as humans, we are less vulnerable to the changes we are creating. So on the one hand, nature-based solutions allow us to reduce the burden on the health sector. But then at the same time, they allow us to deliver better because we are more climate resilient. And at the same time, they allow us to avoid emerging costs that climate change will bring, such as, for instance, destruction related to infrastructure, roads, the power distribution network, and so on and so forth. So we see here in nature-based solutions that synergy that brings together the need to plan top-down and bottom-up within that systemic view and systemic approach. Then the nature-based solutions are also important for another key factor. If we think of climate change, we have now the means and technology and infrastructure to provide climate information systems and early warning services, meaning that we're able to measure with more precision the contribution that these type of investments in nature-based solutions can provide to us. And so finally, we can uncover what is the value that they generate so that we can build it into decision-making. Now, this leads me to my last point, the fourth one, that is how to make this happen, how to make so that what we have learned from the pandemic doesn't go away in a couple of months, but we actually profit from these lessons learned and create a more sustainable and resilient future. Well, in this context, I think we need to expand the work we have been doing on valuing ecosystem services, valuing those dynamics, environmental in this specific case, that necessarily have a social and economic impact as well. And this can be done within the health sector as sort of a sector that could lead the way, pave the road for many others, in the context of building in health considerations in all projects as well as in all policies, meaning that it would be very useful, in my view, to implement, operationalize a systemic approach to see what would be the health consequences of every public investment. Is every investment going to create a burden for health, or is it going to create a synergy for health? At the same time, we could do that for policies. Are we expecting that a given policy, let's say a recovery plan, if it's not a green recovery plan, may lead to more air pollution and therefore increasing the burden on health? So if we know that this may happen, if we forecast it, anticipate it, and plan accordingly, then we can reduce the cost. We can spend our money more effectively. We can deliver a better value to society rather than delivering better value for just the economy. So I think that, again, I started by saying that health is at the center. If you're able to make properly health at the center of decision making in a way that it supports policy development and project development, like we have done with emissions, like we have done with gender, like we have done with many other dimensions, then we'll be able to have a more balanced, more resilient, more coherent plan for the future, where we can capitalize from the lessons learned, and we don't have to wait for the next pandemic or the next emergency to have a wake-up call and have a clear message for how to proceed or how to move forward. So these are my initial considerations, these 4 main points that I want to bring to the table for further discussions on considerations. I will repeat them briefly and then I close. We need to take a systemic approach because health is at the center of development, affected by what happens on the outside, but also affecting all other dynamics. 2, we need to plan taking a bottom-up and a top-down approach, but linking them together. We cannot, from now on, consider them to be 2 different disciplines or processes. 3, nature-based solutions are emerging as an option that creates a strong synergy that will maximize value for money. And we can make use of new technology there for climate information services, early warning systems, to fully capitalize on that value that is created. And 4th, to make this happen, we need to make health in all projects, health in all policies, so that we avoid side effects. We avoid having these surprises, being taken by surprise, and having to deal with the negative outcomes of neglecting such an important dimension of development. I'll stop here and thank you very much again for inviting me and for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, especially how you organize the actions. Very clear and at the same time, very broad explanation and very much focused on the principle that we had defined initially. And now I give the floor to Dr. Maria Neira, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon from Geneva, and thanks very much for the invitation. I hope you are hearing me well. Yes?
Yes, we are, ma'am.
Thank you. I had some technical problems, so I'm afraid I was a little bit concerned about that. Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity and this very interesting discussion. I know that the title of this discussion is about innovation. And sometimes the innovation comes from the most basic principles of public health. And I'm afraid this is one of those cases. We are now confronted to this pandemic of a new and emerging infectious agent. We have been confronted to virus for many, many years, for millions of years probably, since we exist. And we need to start to understand how our relationship with the virus and an emerging infectious diseases should be. And we need to learn about how to be the firefighters. Means now that we are in the middle of the pandemic, for sure we need to fight the virus that is affecting us. We need to be the good ones stopping transmission, developing technology for having the new vaccines, making sure that we take the decisions at the government level, policy making level that will stop this transition and go back to a situation where we don't have a virus causing all of this mortality and morbidity. However, while we do that on fighting the virus at the moment in the pandemics, we need to understand as well what are the reasons that are taking us to this situation. And this is where we need to understand what do we need to do from now on to make sure that we will reduce our vulnerability. I don't want to say to stop completely or to eliminate our vulnerability. That's not possible. The zero risk is almost impossible. But we need to make sure that we take those decisions and we put in place those barriers that will help us to reduce such a vulnerability to a new emerging infectious agent or what the next crisis will be, which is climate change. And how to do that is an innovative solution, which is very much a common sense one, and is about making the right choices on something that I think we have enough science behind and experience behind. This is where we need to start to look at how has been our relationship with biodiversity, with the ecosystems, and why as a society, as a humans, what took us to the fact that we think that in order to grow as a society, we need to destroy whatever is around us. We need to destroy the ecosystems. We need to pollute the water we drink, the air we breathe, or the food we are eating. What's happened in our society that somehow we thought that it was good, that in order to generate some non-sustainable economy, we needed to destroy what it could be the source of our health in the future. And the source of our health are the ecosystems, is nature. I mean, this is the place where we are having all the resources we need to be healthy and to be less vulnerable. So that's why in this case, the innovation, the best vaccine will be our intelligence as a society to really go back and put in place some basic prescriptions. Once we have the diagnosis, once we know that this destruction of the biodiversity, the ecosystems, the terrible deforestation that in some places around the world, around the planet has happening in the last years, and I'm afraid you know very well what I'm talking about, these intensive and aggressive agricultural practices that sometimes we have put in place, these absolutely nonsense practices that were, in order to produce more food, we will use certain pesticides or fertilizers. Then we will produce food for a few months, but then we need to destroy it because we need to handle the waste of the food that we generate, and the land will not be prepared for being again cultivated the next year. So somehow it's like if a farmer producing tomatoes will collect the tomatoes, and once he collects the tomatoes, will destroy completely the land where those tomatoes were growing, without thinking that in few months they will need to collect and to put the seeds and collect the tomatoes again. So that's why WHO, we decided that the only way, we think that the only way to get out of this pandemic, to recover after the COVID-19, and to make sure that at least we will not go for the same systemic failures that we have been detecting until now, we have produced what we call a manifesto for a healthy and green recovery. And this manifesto has 6 prescriptions. One, we have the diagnosis, we have the prescriptions for the disease we are facing at the moment. The first prescription, the number 1, is stop this nonsense battle with nature. I mean, we need to again understand that if we fight with ecosystems, we are the losers, for sure. We might have few years of where we think that all the resources available are they are ours, and that there will be forever there. But in fact, at the end of the day, the planet is the one that is going to win. I mean, no doubt that a little natural disaster will destroy all of us and will clean up all of this mess that we are doing. So recovering this relationship with nature, with our ecosystems, with our biodiversity, being more strategic on the way we do this deforestation, understanding how the health of the planet is linked to the health of the people is fundamental. Of course, understanding the triangle between the environmental health, human health, and zoonotic diseases. I mean, the zoonotic animal health. Those 3 are so much connected that if we think that we are in the center of the planet, we are totally wrong. The second prescription will be about correcting the mistake, one of the structural failures that we have at the moment, systemic failures, which is about more than half of the people in the planet not having access to safe water, sanitation, and basic services in the middle of this pandemic, where the most basic public health recommendation that we are giving to people is wash your hands. Well, for half of the planet, for half of the inhabitants of this planet, washing their hands is something almost impossible. Look at what is happening in India now. A so advanced country, technologically speaking, they still lack access to safe water, to wash their hands, soap, sanitation, and a minimum of hygienic conditions to avoid the overcrowding and the transmission of the virus. So we need to correct that, and that will be an investment logical for protecting our health, but at the same time for an economic recovery and more sustainable one. Prescription number 3 will be about the sources of energy we are using. We need to stop using polluting sources of energy. This is affecting the planet, but more importantly, it's affecting our lungs, our health in general. We are using fossil fuels, and those fossil fuels are polluting the air we breathe, causing more than 7 million premature deaths every year, linked to this bad choice as a society, as a development group, on polluting fuel sources of energy instead of renewable, more modern, more sustainable. And we are killing our trees, our forests, thinking that this can be a way of generating more economy, without realizing that this is destroying everything around, including our health. The prescription number 4 will be about more sustainable food systems. At the moment, we are still using a very non-strategic production of food, which take us to the fact that at the end of the production, 1/3 of the food produced has to be on waste, and we need to even manage that waste and destroying it, contributing again to the pollution. So if we have a more strategic approach to a food system and it's more sustainable, we can handle that and reduce that terrible malnutrition that we have at the moment, and we could have healthy diets for all. Number 5 will be about our cities. Again, our cities are totally with a very dense population, where the cars and the circulation of vehicles is contributing to a terrible situation with injuries, road incidents, and of course, air pollution, again, that citizens in the cities are breathing polluted air all the time. And we need to change that. We need to have a healthier urban planning, where our cities will be more livable, or not a place where your health will be permanently at risk and exposed to all type of risk, but the cars and the vehicles will be the center of the universe, and they will be very protected, and the city will be done around the cars and not around our health and around our citizens. And the last prescription is, again, a common sense one that can help on the economic and health recovery, which is stop using taxpayers' money to subsidize coal or subsidize fossil fuels. That money is very badly spent, because we have 400 billions going every year to subsidies, without realizing that the externalities caused by the use of the combustion of those fossil fuels are contributing to climate change, and of course are contributing to air pollution, contributing to the 7 million, and contributing to the $5 trillion that we spend as a society paying the health cost generated by the exposure to the combustion of those fossil fuels. So that's why I say, for me, the best innovation at the critical and exceptional time we are living is to use our intelligence as a society, be a little bit more strategic, and go to the basic, to the principles, and to what took us until here, and corrected it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much, Mrs. Neira, for your fantastic presentation. And it's really difficult to make a summary of the great topics, but there is a renowned economist here in Brazil, very well known, called Herminio Fraga yesterday, he gave a speech and he said that the most important vaccine would be a vaccine against ignorance. And you, Dr. Neira, you said that the vaccine is the intelligence. So ultimately, there is a conversion of thoughts. We're talking about a vaccine against ignorance. And as you said, Dr. Neira, and another thing that you mentioned, Doctor, common sense. Common sense, which is one of the greatest problems that we face in the public debate with reference to the pandemic. It is the lack of common sense that we see in different areas in society, and that it has nothing to do with the technical aspects, trying to understand what that happens, a denial evidence, as Dr. Bassi and Dr. Neira mentioned, things that are proof, clear proof, and unlike closed science, there's no such need of science, a lack of common sense, a lack of intelligence. And another topic that has to do with cities and externalities in cities. People have the illusion that fuel cost is what you pay at the gas station when you fill up the tank. But actually, what they're paying is much more than that. So this concept is a concept that has to be changed. So thank you for your great contributions. And my dear friend, Sérgio Besserman, you can take the floor now. You're muted, Sérgio. Topics you presented, and I totally agree. So I will try to make my comments based upon hers. So let me start my presentation now with the beginning of science. A French intellectual decided brilliantly with one single statement, give an answer to topics. What is an answer? An answer is the unhappiness of a question, because questions are much more important than answers. And answers open up many more questions. But well, a question is intriguing. It creates anxiety. It creates thoughtfulness. And a question is the basis, the foundation of knowledge. And it gives you the possibility to react to a question. So Maria presented many timely topics, which is the starting point in knowledge, compared to ignorance, compared to the despise of knowledge and information. In a century when we have that name, information and knowledge, so it is a calling to common sense. The question is, why? That in 2021, ignorance, lack of common sense, and a cultural relativism that confuses the fact that all opinions have the same freedom of speech, as Voltaire said. I agree what you say, but I will defend it till death. So this does not mean to say that opinions are equivalent. If one person says it's raining and the other person says it's sunny, you can keep on arguing until you open up the window and check if it's raining or if it's sunny. So, Zeitgeist, I mean, interestingly, Pope Bento XVI, with his abbess in the first part of the decade, said that we have to value reason and consider that cultural relativism is a question. And this is a question. The question is, in the age of information and the age of knowledge, why do we have in social and political processes a clear setback in the value of knowledge? The topic, climate change, and many other aspects in which environmental issues affect health, but climate change has local territorial effects. So we not only need scientific knowledge, broad knowledge on the truth and reality of climate change, but each city and neighborhoods within cities, each location, each water basin should be able to study, know what's going on to plan itself in terms of impact, local impact. Look at the case of Rio de Janeiro, where I'm based. There are endless issues. We have floods because we have a mountainous landscape. We have leptospirosis and other diseases, vectors. Aedes aegypti transmitted dengue fever from November till March. We are used to having it in that season, but Fiocruz, which is the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, which is a research institute, researches the transmission of the vector. So we have dengue fever, chikungunya, Zika fever that are now year-long diseases. So the access to new pathogens, which are increasingly contagious as coronavirus 19, is not a consequence of deforestation and the proximity with wild areas, but also due to vectors. It's inevitable that 1 degree in warming, this 1 degree in warming makes that yellow fever vector in the urban forests here in Rio de Janeiro, Tijuca forest, in different urban forests in Rio de Janeiro thrive. So there are many other vectors that will flourish and thrive and come closer to populations. Other than that, heat itself has large impacts on health. So our data systems, absurdly, without common sense, as Dr. Neira and David says, there are no data that relate violence, stroke, and heart disease to hot days. We know that there are hot waves in Pakistan and India where the architecture is more ready for the hot weather. Here we have rooftops because in our slums we have the houses that build rooftops because it is another place where you can enjoy the wind and escape the heat. Paris is a modern city, but thousands of people died in a heat wave, in a hot wave. So which is the solution for this? Information for the elderly, drink water, drink water, drink water, and solidarity, which is a decisive component of the pandemic. And you and your family, look for the elderly person that lives alone and drink water, and seek medical attention if you need so. And we were not able to do this. Paris was not able to do this, but with territorial studies and data systems, these studies are essential so that populations, as Andrea mentioned, to demand their climatic rights. There are climatic rights. So slums as Marais slum, Rio das Pedras slum, Piraqué slums, as the many slums we have here in Rio de Janeiro, the famous favelas, and we have a lot of communities like this, they have to fight and have to position themselves with reference to their environmental rights. So we need to reforest, not only for carbon sequestration purposes, for ecosystemic purposes that have been mentioned already, but also because the Lancet published a study that shows that the simple act of watching a green landscape coming and going to work changes your health. And Darwin would naturally have said, okay, what did you expect? So these renaturalization of cities of our landscape with the use of green infrastructure and the possibility to have access to ecosystemic services is essential. I would like to conclude by saying something, because I do not need to repeat what has been said. We have to call the attention to the topic of technologic knowledge or technology, or small political choices. There is a large movement in which we have, on the one hand, to admit the knowledges that the original peoples had, that was transmitted by generations and generations. And we have this knowledge that was transmitted for thousands of years, and how we degraded the well-being of our planet and of billions of human beings. So the understanding that we are part, that is, we do not have our home. We are inhabitants of the planet. This awareness has to permeate all the domains of the economic knowledge, to begin with economics and other topics related to the sciences. But there are such great choices. I only have 30 seconds. I will end radically and quickly. Transformation is in the size of the Enlightenment, of Renaissance. Everything that happened in the 20th century, the First World War, the fall of the Wall of Berlin, everything is small in face of the choices of the coming decades. Amongst them, two that justify the comparison with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Homo sapiens, humanity, is tribal. We are tribal. We are very tribal. We are like chimpanzees. We are tribal, yes. The time has come that the story of the Tower of Babel should continue on. We need to be a tribe of all tribes. Climate change, amongst other issues, but this, with the biodiversity crisis, is a global trouble. It is a global challenge and can only be faced globally. Global governance, well above what we have today. A tribe, mankind, concrete, not abstract thing, a tribe of all tribes with infinite diversity and infinite combinations. One tribe, mankind as a tribe, with a tribe of all tribes. If we don't do this, we will not win the climatic crisis. And to conclude, the timeline for our awareness as a species must change. We need to take steps now to avoid consequences 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. If we were eliminated tomorrow, we would still have greenhouse effects for 500 years. And we are all enthusiastic about this new time we're living, but we're still spending 400 billion US dollars yearly to subsidize and distort the prices of fossil fuels, that is subsidizing global warming. $100 billion for adaptation and mitigation initiatives for poorer countries would be part of the math in changes for climate change, with not even one single dollar spent in this area. So these are the different possibilities we have for mankind, and the fact that we must become a tribe with a global governance in this century, far beyond what we have today, makes this moment in history. History is not monotonic. There are turning points in history and main innovations. The main innovation is to understand that this is an historic transformation, a major historic transformation. Thank you. Thank you, Sérgio. Great, as always. And we clearly understand that it seems obvious, but must be explained and repeated. We're guests. We're guests here. And actually, there is a saying by Saint-Exupéry that I always love to quote that says, we shouldn't lose the land of our forefathers and keep it for our sons and daughters. So the pandemic, the agenda for this process, considering what happened during the pandemic, is that there has been a collective feeling that arose due to the pandemic with integration in the search of a solution unprecedented, not seen for tropical diseases. You mentioned several diseases that are, of course, unknown maybe for countries in the north, and that kill millions of people, and that do not raise awareness of big pharma or governments, because solidarity, and this is not a criticism, it's a fact. It's a fact. Because when danger knocks at your door, you become friends and solidarity to solve an issue. And this is what happened with this issue. And innovation, technology, and knowledge are the pillars of the solution. I have a question. And then we can maybe go back to some topics. A question specifically for Andrea Bassi. And this is the question. As is the case with sanitation, electrical energy, water in general terms, don't you think that internet access should be a basic global right, Mr. Bassi? In the concept of association of health and access, democratic access. And what do you think about this, Dr. Bassi?
Yes, I think it is a very good question, actually. If you're moving towards using early warning systems for heat waves, for the pandemic, for water shortages, for supporting farmers in better planning their agricultural practices, then I would say yes, we need systems that can quickly deliver information where it is needed in the format that is needed. And at the moment, mobile phones, internet connection, mobile services is what is providing the cheapest and fastest access to information. On the other hand, there are challenges to this. And I would refer back to what was mentioned earlier on intelligence and the tribe of tribes. If providing internet access creates even more individualism, so it creates even more a divide between people and breaks the connections, creating even more silos, then it creates even more problems. Because I think in the way I work and I approach this, as I said, we need to look at systems. And looking at systems means breaking the silos. It means exactly using our collective intelligence across domains and reaching as one population, the solutions that we need to realize. Because otherwise, if we provide information, but then people use it in their own advantage and at the expense of others, then we have more problems than we had originally. What I see in my work when I develop policy plans and strategies or assess investments with governments is that I work with different ministries joining the same discussion around the same table. We discuss with academia, we discuss with civil society, we bring our collective intelligence, understanding, as well as data and knowledge onto the same discussion. But then this is primarily used to break the silos and make sure that we are aware of the outcomes of our actions. But so far what I've seen in the vast majority of cases is that there is no ministry that is willing to give up money for another one because they're expecting to save in the future. It's all a race to get more and more money, and even more so, it's a race to get money by undermining the performance of others so that I can get more. Now, this is an ongoing trend that I've seen in the last 20 years of my work experience, where we are less and less a tribe of tribes. We are more and more individuals, and then we feel lost in this crisis. So if universal internet access can bring us the information that we can use to understand the problems and challenges that others are facing so that we can come as one to solve these problems at government level, but also at citizen level, then I would say yes, absolutely. It would be a very cost-effective way to break these silos and develop in a more sustainable way.
Thank you very much. I would like to make a comment in these last 10 minutes that is appropriate, I would say, for our three guest speakers. And this has to do with the democratization of health access. Because once again, and we talk about the pandemic drawed our attention to the importance of universal access to health and how different countries' regimes acted better or worse in terms of the structure they had. So here in Brazil, even those that found that we had a powerful situation, there is a consensus whereby our Universal Access Health Service, SUS for the acronym in Brazil, compared to other countries that have more centralized systems. And this also includes the sense of the word environmental in a broader sense, with a perception of what this entails when you make everything comprehensive. The perception of the environment with a clear inclusion of the topic of technologies, that is connecting these three issues: healthcare, technology innovation, and how great national systems act and have an impact on the fight against a pandemic, for instance, in terms of the future with reference to health, or in general terms, or whatever might come our way in the future. If anybody wants to take the floor. I think that since we're running out of time, maybe Dr. Maria?
Just very, very quickly, here is again another very innovative and intelligent investment to do: universal health coverage. I think we knew it in public health. We have been proposing all of that for a long time, but the pandemic have really exposed us to our weaknesses as a society. And one of the best way to protect and to reinforce and avoid all of those weaknesses is just to have a universal health coverage. Best investment together with investment on education that you can do to protect your society. Over.
David, if I may, I would like to make a comment. And in line with Dr. Neira, and talking about our national healthcare system, SUS. My parents were medical doctors, and the SUS is part of my life. But money allocated in the health sector in Brazil, maybe 20, 25%. Maybe halfway through, we lose, and red tape and unnecessary spending and lack of efficiency, corruption, almost 12. 75%, give or take. Well, there is no paper to prove this, but conversations in the last 20 years with main health managers in Brazil. Digitalization is in our hands to be the way out. And of course, we need more funds, but without needing so many resources that are unavailable to transform our health system more efficient. It's unacceptable that a Brazilian would go to a city hospital or a family service. It's unacceptable that his personal record is not online. How can this be? If he has an accident in São Paulo, in another city, and he goes to a public hospital, what about his record? This is one aspect. And another very practical aspect that has to do with digitalization. It's a long way forward. It is a long way forward. But another topic that Dr. Bassi mentioned, and Dr. Neira too, there are so many good things, but what's going on with the pandemic, what some of the bad things in the pandemic, and having an individual perspective in this sense, and analyzing modern life, I think that many societies have very little cooperation and cohesion to face problems, as there is part of the population, even in developed countries, that are deeply ignorant about the basic science. And this is a problem in the fight against the pandemic. And what about climate change, new pandemics, let alone all of these topics. So there are two things. On the one hand, we need to focus on digitalization, but we still need time to read 300-page long novels. So Confucius is a philosopher that said that we have to take time to analyze facts, and we need to strengthen cooperation. I talked about Darwin. Human species is competitive due to its capacity to cooperate and loses resilience when it cooperates less. And the second question is not only related to digital access, but also access to knowledge, education, value education through, of course, internet. Deep knowledge, deeper than what great populations, even in developed countries, which is the basis of the justifications, fake justifications for individual and antisocial behavior in this pandemic, and maybe, who knows, in the fight against the crisis. But I guess we will make it. Sérgio, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Andrea, wrap up in 1 minute. Maria, wrap up in 1 minute before we conclude.
Yes, so briefly from my side, I hope that the current situation has made it clear that health means money, in a way. For better or worse, money moves the economy, moves the world. So I hope that now there is a stronger recognition that we cannot just boost the economy as the economy alone. The economy can only advance in a sustainable way if we take care of society and the environment at the same time. So I hope that this becomes more central in decision-making going forward. As we said, there are many means to make it happen, but I hope this is the one opportunity we have now in the short term to make it happen, especially with the green recovery packages and the planning for the net zero or decarbonization in the medium and longer term.
From my side, very similar. We are in the moment where massive investments will be promoted in order to recover our economy, and those investments need to be strategic, keeping in mind that the health impact and the sustainable choices that our society is making might have a horrible or good impact on our health. So health impact assessment kind of in all policies needs to be again recovered. The second message will be that the health community, the public health society will have a major responsibility of driving this healthy and green recovery by providing all of this evidence and mobilizing our community in the name of health.
Thank you. Great. Yes, the last take-home message to wrap up this panel being traditional. Investment would be enough to redirect subsidies allocated for energy activities that cause diseases first. Stop doing this, we would prevent diseases, we would decrease the need of investment, and these funds could be used to support and fill gaps and unbalances due to the bad use of funds, not due to the lack of funds. So I would like to thank the participation of our guest speakers, Dr. Bassi, Dr. Neira, Sérgio Besserman. Thank you very much for the invitation to be the moderator of this panel. It is always a pleasure to participate and learn from such great speakers as we had this morning in this panel. Take care, keep safe, and thank you very much.